Sports by Brooks on Fancred. My name is Brooks Melchior, and I'm live in Los Angeles. We do this every weekday from noon to 2 Eastern Time. I'm joined by our producer, Cam Smith, coming up at the top of the hour. Next hour, we'll have Connor Orr of Monday Morning Quarterback, Sports Illustrated. He works with Bert Breer, does a great job. And he's going to break down the NFL playoff picture for us. Did that for MMQB. Check it out there if you want right now. But did that for them earlier today. So we'll talk to him about that and some other things going on in the NFL. But we'll be talking NFL exclusively here in the first hour. And then in the next hour, we'll talk a little bit about what happened with Joe Burrow, his amazing speech, in case you missed it. So we'll hit the highlight as far as college football goes. Later on this week, we're going to have Jamel Hill on the show. Tim Brando is going to be rejoining us. We're going to have Phil Perry on from NBC Sports Boston. And Mike McCarthy is going to come on with us tomorrow from Front Office Sports. So a cavalcade, that's not a word people use anymore. That's a really old reference. That's too old for me, by the way. Cavalcade of Stars. No. Great guest lineup coming as usual this week, and more to come, of course. But first, let's get started with the NFL. And I want to start off debunking something that you've been hearing about incessantly since yesterday. If you were watching the NFL or if you had watched any sports media up until right now, from the time the games start until now, you've been told Urban Meyer is in Washington. He's in Dan Snyder's box. Where is Bruce Allen? What's going on? Is Meyer in the market? It's not even that. It's not is Meyer. And it's Meyer is in the market to become the Redskins head coach. And that's been the discussion on the national talk shows this morning, on radio and television, as I have scanned them, fanned out and listened to all of them, watched them, giving their opinion about how it would go if Urban Meyer was the head coach of the Washington Redskins. The problem with that is he's not going to be head coach of the Washington Redskins. He wasn't there to see Dan Snyder. Dan Snyder didn't invite him. It has nothing to do with Dan Snyder as to why he was there. Urban Meyer was at the Army-Navy game just up the road from D.C. Come to find out, he called former Ohio State Buckeye Terry McLaurin and asked him if he could come to the game and hang out. And that's how Urban Meyer ended up in the box. Of course, Alex Smith just happened to be playing for Urban Meyer at Utah, right? And he was in the box as well. We do hear reports coming out of the DC media today that Alex Smith spent 4 hours with Dan Snyder after the game, as if that's, maybe Snyder is evaluating Meyer as a candidate. But I think that Meyer going to the Cowboys or the Redskins is, well, put it this way. I really don't think he's going to go to the Cowboys because of Jerry Jones. But who knows? I'm going to stop doing what everybody else is doing, speculating about anything. I just told you he's not going to the Redskins. Then I'm all of a sudden, wait a minute. No, he's not. And we're going to tell you why it was there with video. We've got Terry McLaurin, the receiver for the Redskins, explaining it. So let's run the video. We also have video of Urban Meyer at the Army-Navy game. Let's go to that video right now, and this will clear things up for you, since I didn't, of course. And I believe Terry McLaurin is first up on this video, if I'm not mistaken. Ohio State receiver who invited Urban Meyer to the game at FedEx Field yesterday. That's why Meyer was there. So we'll have that, and then we'll show you Urban at the Army-Navy game. Then we're going to show you some McLaurin highlights, which are unbelievable. It's just a gratuitous drop it in there, just to drop it in there. And if you missed all this, well, you're up to date now on what happened. But if you were on Twitter yesterday, or you were paying attention, I mean, it was like a hysteria that he was in D.C. and at the game. Of course, they're not in D.C. They're in Virginia at FedEx Field. So everything that I've heard, all indications are that Urban Meyer is going to end up at Notre Dame, and I predict he'll be there in 2021. I don't think Brian Kelly is going to stay at Notre Dame. I think he's going to leave voluntarily. Go ahead.
This is Urban Meyer.
There's Urban Meyer at the Army-Navy game.
And once in a lifetime, and I'm so incredibly proud of our country, incredibly grateful to these men and women who go to school at these great academies.
First, just to get that out there, Coach Meyer was here to support me and Dwayne. He was in town. He called me last night, and he wanted to come support me at the game. So he was my guest, and it was good to see him again, good to talk to him. Surpasses football. Has nothing to do with his coaching status.
Thank you.
All. And
where was this clip on ESPN this morning?
Support me again.
Or Fox. So here's McLaren and Dwayne Haskins, two Buckeyes hooking up. Both played for Urban Meyer. That was yesterday against the Eagles. McLaren also has the catch of the year in the NFL. If you haven't seen it, the catch of the year really in the league was this play here. Watch.
Haskins fires
left-handed.
By Terry McLaurin for a Redskins touchdown. This is a rocket of a throw, and I'm not sure how Terry McLaurin, who I'm going to assume is right-handed, makes this catch with his left hand. Watch this catch.
Unbelievable.
Oh my God. What a
got some stick-em on there from Fred Biletnikoff.
Terry McLaurin. He's been doing this all year for Washington.
That's amazing.
Had no production in the first half of this game. This drive, though, he's been the go-to guy for Dwayne Haskins.
Catch of the year.
Just pretty. Right just there. A beautiful juggling catch by the rookie wide receiver.
So if you have been watching the media, listening to the media, the last 24 hours, you've been told that Meyer is a candidate. I mean, there's no indication that he's a candidate. McLaren just told you why he was there. And I think it's interesting fodder. I'm not saying they shouldn't be talking about it. Those dummies. That's not what I mean. I mean that's why he was there, and nobody is airing that clip. I haven't seen it anywhere. That's what we do. I mean, that's the way I am. It's like, let's get to the root. Why was he there? What's the deal? Why am I not seeing him with Snyder in the box? There was one little photograph from a DC media member, Rihanna Walker. So FedEx Field is in Maryland. Let me check. FedEx Field is in Maryland. It is? Okay, let's check. Let's find out where that is. It's in Prince George County. You are correct. Thank you for that. Landover, Maryland. Where did I get that it was up in Northern Virginia? Why would I think that FedEx Field is in Northern Virginia? What am I thinking? That's where my family lives. Weird. Strange. Cam, did you ever have that? Have you always been Landover, Maryland on FedEx Field? Weird. Strange. DC is really, really a messed up area, by the way. So very, very difficult place to figure out and drive around, and spent a lot of time in DC the last 4 or 5 years. So, so thanks for that. And we got to get a pronunciation on the guy who just sent in a comment, who's watching the show. Cam, give me a pronunciation of his name, so I don't mispronounce his name. Because if you want to comment on the show, you want to interact on the show, click on the fan line button on the screen. If you want, we can talk to you on screen. We've got some time today. I wanted to ease off the guests a little bit today because we've been so heavy on the guests. Like Friday, it was almost all guests. And so we want to bring you some of this cool stuff that we have. Beyond guests, guests are great and we'll continue to have them, but I wanted to just kind of change things up a little bit today. So that's the story there with Urban Meyer with the Redskins. Now, of course, another big rumor involving Urban Meyer that started October 18th. And Sia is the pronunciation of the gentleman who's watching out there right now and who let me know it was in Maryland. Thank you, Sia, for doing that. And feel free to comment in the future. So, so another rumor out there involving Urban Meyer is that he might go to the Cowboys as the head coach. This rumor germinated on Colin Cowherd's radio show October 18th when Cowherd was talking about Lincoln Riley, if he would leave this coaching job at Oklahoma, and he had Urban Meyer sitting there. And Meyer, of course, former Ohio State coach, Florida coach, Utah coach. He's been in that kind of a situation, high-profile program, winning coach, coveted perhaps by NFL teams. And so, Cowherd was kind of drawing that comparison, and eventually he asked Meyer, if the Cowboys ever called you, would you listen? And Meyer said, of course. It's like one of those jobs. It's like the New York Yankees. And so that's where we were off to the races. And again, the whole pretense of this is dubious, questionable. So later, we get a report from Jane Slater from NFL Network that indeed the Cowboys are interested in Urban Meyer. They're also interested in a guy that we have mentioned. You've heard his name on this show many times. Clemson co-offensive coordinator Tony Elliott. You don't hear that name anywhere in the media. You really don't, which is unbelievable, because when you look at assistant coaches, let's say like Sam Pittman, who just got the job at Arkansas, and of course we've covered that very closely, but all of these assistants getting jobs, and that really has been the trend. If you look at high-profile openings, Tony Elliott is probably the number one assistant out there who's actually someone who people want. Like Dave Aranda, who's making $2 million a year at LSU. The reason we heard about him going to UNLV is LSU is not bending over backwards to make him feel like he should never leave, right? You get what I'm saying? LSU's defense has struggled, and Aranda's making a lot of money, and he's the defensive coordinator. So when you hear about him going to UNLV, that's weird, but it's not weird if you know the situation. Jeff Scott, the other co-offensive coordinator at Clemson, went to South Florida. Kind of a similar situation to Aranda. I don't think that Dabo Swinney is up at night worrying about Jeff Scott leaving. Tony Elliott, different story. He's kind of the guy there, and that's who the Cowboys reportedly are looking at. And I've confirmed that through a source. They're not talking to Tony Elliott, the Cowboys aren't, but they're reaching out to representatives of guys like that. All right. So on that front, that is 100% legitimate. I'm not saying that Jane's reporting is not all legitimate, but as far as Urban goes, who's to say that he wouldn't take the Cowboys job? Because he's sitting there on national radio and it's on television saying, yeah, listen, they're like the Yankees. And also, if you think about, and I'm going to go back to the Redskins. The Redskins job would probably be a situation where if you're Urban Meyer or of that ilk, you would say to yourself, I have the stature and the ability to get the power over player personnel, much like I would in college football. And Bruce Allen is on his last legs, perhaps. That's what we're hearing. But of course, we've heard that about Jason Garrett for 5 years. And we're going to touch on him in a second. But if you're Urban Meyer, that might be a situation where you would have the ability to have the power that Bruce Allen has right now, and that essentially got Jay Gruden fired. Gruden didn't have that power. That's why he's gone. That's why Haskins wasn't playing. It wasn't so much, I think, that Jay Gruden didn't want to play Haskins. It was he was trying to win to keep his job because he didn't have the security of being the overarching guy with the organization. That's something I would think Urban might demand, but he might not because of the stress level that recruiting brought to his life. Recruiting, having control over your player personnel. So now think about the Cowboys. Whichever coach goes in there, you can guarantee you're not going to have another Bill Parcells situation. That's not going to happen. It won't happen with Urban Meyer, I would think, because Urban Meyer might not want it because, again, of the stress and the problems that he's had with his health. And I don't deny that he's had some problems. I think that there is some legitimacy to it. Most people say there isn't. Most people say he's just making it up, psychosomatic, whatever it is. I think that there is some legitimacy to it. So those are my observations. Now, of course, the Cowboys coming off a big win over those Rams. those Rams. And the Cowboys are showing us the kind of talent, the physical play, the inspired play by that team that they've always been capable of. Yesterday was not a fluke. Of course, the Rams aren't necessarily as good as people have thought they are throughout the season. They've come on a little bit here recently, and then they got beat down yesterday by the Cowboys. And so Jason Garrett is all but gone, right, in the last few weeks, especially. And, of course, this was going on the year before, and the year before that, and the year before that. And you notice when we've had guests on this show, NFL guests, media, esteemed media members, I have, asked them, what leads you to believe that Jason Garrett is going to be fired during the season or after the season? What indication do we have? And so now think about that principle, because again, he's all but gone. The media is telling you he's going to be fired every day the last 2 months, right? Part of that is the expectations of this talent level on this team this year. It's higher than it has been in the past. Of course, Jerry Jones, though, is the number one reason. Number one, because he's stoking it. He's fueling it. And he knows he is. So, but what I wanted to show you was, so they blow the Rams out yesterday. It was a great game. Honest to God, it's like, it reminds me a little bit of how ridiculous and absurd the media reaction, my reaction, your reaction, or all of our reaction about this. Jason Garrett suddenly is a different guy. He's not the guy that we're going to fire now. We've totally changed. And there's two things happening. Number one, that's just the way we are after they blow the Rams out, a good team. And they show the talent. They show the scheming, the coaching, the ability they've always had. So you're naturally going to say, okay, Jason Garrett, now he's back on solid ground, right? That's one part of it. But also the other part of it is you're looking at Jerry Jones after the game. Now suddenly he's changed his tune about Garrett. Suddenly he's saying, yeah, we look great. Whereas before he was throwing the coaching staff under the bus. So we have some videotape from last night after the game that I think is very telling when it comes to the Cowboys and Jason Garrett and his situation, and is one of the reasons why I've been saying for the whole time he's not going to be fired under any circumstances. So this is Dak Prescott. Sean Lee is first on the tape, and then we got Jerry Jones making a few comments. But watch the first two comments.
We rallied around that, and at our best in the past, that's what we've done. We've picked each other up. Coach Garrett gave an unbelievable speech talking about, hey, we need to pick each other up.
Coach Garrett gave a speech.
Well or not doing well, the other side's got to step up. It's one of the best speeches I've ever heard from him. It was great. I think we all kind of rallied around that, and really,
talk about his speech.
We have to find a way to pick each other up no matter what.
Going into the game,
He gave it before the game.
He gave us a story about him playing baseball and just about what it means to be a team, and about I got your back, and no matter what happens, I got you. I'll pick you up, and that's what it was, and that's what we did tonight through adversity, through success. A bunch of guys, voiced it, but looked at each other and say, hey, I got
baseball
you. I'm
story.
gonna pick you up, and we're able to do that tonight, and it's something we've got to continue to build on.
this really is for us.
Now here's Jerry.
Day at a time season now, or certainly
By the way,
week at
that's
a
a
time
hairpiece.
season. The entire season,
You know that?
can be really made into something very successful if we can go up there and beat Philadelphia.
There we go. So Sean Lee, the sound wasn't all that great, but his thing was, hey, Jason told us this motivational story before the game, and it's one of the best speeches I've ever heard to get us fired up. So this is a guy on the Dallas Cowboys, right? Saying that he's been around a long time. He's heard a lot of speeches from a lot of coaches. That's the best speech he's ever heard. What? Best speech you've ever heard? This guy, Jason Garrett, is fired. He's gone. He's the guy that you won't high five, not Sean Lee, but your teammates. For years, they've been doing that. He's the guy who gets thrown under the bus by your owner, who's everywhere, assessing the team at all times. and suddenly he gives you the Vince Lombardi speech. It's not a coincidence. It comes after. It makes me wonder how many times do you think he's given, fiery speeches and they've lost 44-0, whatever it is. I have a feeling he's done that before. But Dak Prescott, I think, was a little bit more in tune with reality. He's a little more, not all that overly excited about relating the story. And he didn't just bring it up on his own. You didn't hear the question, but a female reporter had brought it up. And okay, maybe she heard it from another player who had volunteered it. Maybe she heard it from a staff member. Yeah, did you hear about Jay's? Ask Dak about it. The speech. Yeah, it was amazing. And it actually took place Saturday night, not right before the game, but Saturday night. That's what had the Cowboys so fired up and accountable. They're accountable to each other. Now, that actually does make a little sense if you're Jason Garrett and you're preaching. If there was one thing you were going to say and you had an owner who is constantly in public with his hairpiece on, come forward, constantly assessing the team, good, bad, indifferent, doesn't matter what it is. When the owner does that, it destabilizes you as a head coach. And of course, Jerry does it every 5 minutes and has done it for 25 years and they haven't won anything. And that's why that is the reason why, because of the impact it has on the relationship the players have with the coaches, the coaching staff and the head coach, right? It muddies up the situation. It confuses the situation. So now think about the principle of Garrett. If you're Garrett and you're going to give a speech to the team, right, to try to fire the team up or communicate to them, what's the best way to approach your job under these circumstances? You would say, right, you're not accountable. Essentially, you're not accountable to me. You're not accountable to the owner. You're accountable to each other. That's what you heard Dak and Sean Lee say. That's what the speech was about. Guys, look around the locker room. You're accountable to each other. That's really the only way to approach it if you're the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. Because if you're giving off the impression they're accountable solely to you, which in most situations that is the case, that's how normal teams operate. Usually there are a lot of there's exceptions. If you think about in the NFL, Aaron Rodgers and Matt LaFleur, it's kind of a different relationship, but that really is a small minority. But with the Cowboys, particularly, who are you accountable to, right? You're supposed to be accountable to your coaches, but then you have an owner in your locker room after the game at New England throwing your special teams coach, your defensive coordinator, your offensive under the bus, whoever it might be at the time. That's what Jerry Jones does. So it makes sense that Garrett would do that, I guess. But what's fascinating to me is it's very similar to the situation with Belichick, which we're going to talk about here in a second. And of course, we have the ultimate breakdown, which is going to elucidate you on the Patriots and the Bengals in the video, which we covered like nobody's business with people from Boston and New England on this show last week. But it reminds me a little bit, the approach with Jason Garrett saying he's going to be fired. He's going to be fired. What makes you think he's going to be fired? This has been going on for years. Please. It reminds me that mass delusion of the media and fans that might happen when you have the only team in the league's owner, out in the media 24/7. That's the reason Jason's not going to get fired. He's been doing this forever. There's been speculation forever. It is different than the other teams in the league. But we can't see that. We're too close to it, the media and the fans. You got to step away. It's similar to the Patriots situation with Belichick. Jay Glazer breaks the video yesterday on his show. You could make the argument that's the biggest story, breaking story of the year. All genres, including news. the impeachment, that's much ado. I mean, where's that going? Nowhere. So, and of course, the NFL, just look at television ratings. It's the biggest thing going. So now you've got the greatest coach in the history of the NFL, right? With 6 rings. This God, this myth, right? His organization is caught again. And I mean, really caught. We talked to Greg Bedard about this last week. And Greg shocked me when he said, if it's a worst case scenario video, you may remember me saying this, asking him the question, because I asked him, if it's the worst case scenario, Greg, what do you think is going to happen? And this guy has been around the NFL for a very long time, covered a lot of beats, currently covers the Raiders beat in Vegas and also the Patriots beat, both. And he actually said suspension, maybe a ban. If it's the worst case, well, it is the worst case scenario. Maybe we should have Greg back on, but that's not going to happen. There's no chance that's going to happen. And the reason is, I mean, the key here is Belichick. All right? Belichick. It doesn't matter that whether his denial is true or not, whether he's lying about knowing about it at this point does not matter anymore. We have the tape. The NFL knows. The world has seen it now. That's crucial. That's huge, right? So the fact that the NFL knows that we've all seen the tape, now you would think that much more accountable, right? And it doesn't matter what Belichick says, whether he says he knew or not. There's something called plausible deniability. That's what happens in every corporation, in every large organization. You've got people at the top, operating at the top with a tacit agreement with people who work underneath them that they can do things without telling them, right, that they shouldn't be doing. This is an example. That's possible. The other big part of the situation, and we'll show you the tape here in a second, but we're going to show you some other things in relation to the tape as well, is the response of the camera guy instantly offering to delete the tape. So that's all you need to see. So now we've got a repeat offender in Belichick who set up this vast system of cheating. Now, it could have been through Ernie Adams, who we introduced you to on this show. I don't think I've ever heard Ernie Adams' name mentioned on ESPN or Fox or CBS or NBC. Maybe it has. But it sure seems like this could be a case where Ernie Adams was spearheading all of this cheating in the past. But Belichick, at least in the case of the previous cheating, knew about it, had to know about it, because it was too huge, vast. You know, it was under lock and key in its own area in the office complex, right? All the tapes and all the notes and things like that. So we know that he was involved in that, and he got no punishment. Zero. Patriots got no punishment. Nothing that matters. What matters is, I mean, except for Brady, he's the only exception in Deflategate, right? So now we're in a situation where they're repeat offenders. We've seen the tape. Clearly, the cameraman knew he was doing something wrong. And so now, if you're the NFL, this truly is a referendum on what you think of the media and the public. If you do not suspend Belichick, which to me is the only thing you can do in the situation, it's the only rational thing you can do in this situation, right? If you don't do that, the NFL is telling us that they own the media, that the media will never really hold them accountable, that the media is not independent for whatever reason. Of course, the media is in bed with the league. The media is bankrolled by the league indirectly, you know, except for the NFL Network people, right? So if they don't suspend, Roger Goodell does not suspend Belichick. He's telling us that we own the media and we don't think it's going to bother you guys. You're on our side, right? You're going to go along with everything. Even if we tell you something isn't tainted, the 6 Super Bowl rings of the Patriots, when we all now know it is. And that's before the video. Their legacy is tainted, period. It's tarnished, period. End of story. In any normal, rational thinking situation, right? So I'm here to tell you that the Patriots are not going to have to worry about Belichick getting suspended, because that's the way the NFL already approaches it. Why shouldn't they? Look at how ESPN covers this story that Jay Glazer released. Barely touched on it last night. I was watching SportsCenter. I watched SVP. I don't know if you guys watched SVP. A lot of you do. I do. His late night sport. I don't think he mentioned it. I watched it twice. It was barely mentioned during the coverage of the NFL on all of the networks yesterday after Jay broke the story. And Fox on their, post-game shows, they weren't all that enthusiastic about bringing it up either, for obvious reasons. But to the point where we were talking about the Cowboys and the coaching situation and what is analogous when we're saying Jason Garrett's going to get fired, that's ridiculous. Why would you think that? It's the same principle as when Jay Glazer reports that story on Fox, they go back to the desk with the Fox NFL Sunday guys, and each one of them yesterday said, I don't think Bill really knew about it. I believe Bill. On what basis do you believe him? Did you read the 2015 story about the vast cheating that was going on? Industrialized scale cheating, right? It was incredible. I'm not saying other teams aren't doing it, but another big thing about this situation that we heard from Dan Orlovsky, and Dan, of course, friend of the show, has been on the show. I think Dan was on last week, or if he wasn't on last week on this show, he was on the week before. Got to get him back on here soon. This is the most damning thing I've heard. Dan said when he was playing in the NFL, he played in games against the Patriots. And whenever they played the Patriots on the road in Foxborough, the teams he played on, the coaching staff would tell the players, don't ever leave your playbook anywhere where it's not in your sight. If you leave your hotel room, take your playbook with you. Take all of your film with you, right? In a backpack, whatever it was. So the whole team, Detroit Lions, whoever he was with when they were playing the Patriots. I mean, everybody's got backpacks, right? Rollaways or something, because they've got all of their stuff, because they can't leave it in their rooms because of what the Patriots might do. On top of that, and I really want you to listen closely to this, because this is the crucial point as it pertains to the Bengals situation and Spygate 1, because this is Spygate 2. This is Spygate 2 Turbo version. And Orlovsky says today he said it this morning on ESPN. He said, of all the places that because Dan played in the league a long time. Of all the places that we went to on the road, and he played at all the visiting stadiums, the 2 stadiums that we went to and that had a reputation of this, where your headsets would always go out, your communication would always go out at least once a game, was Minnesota and Foxborough, New England. Now think about that videographer filming the sidelines, filming the field in the way that he was, and his instant reaction, I'll delete it. And what we know has been meticulously documented by Don Van Natta and Seth Wickersham at ESPN in 2015. So now that I've said that, so to repeat, Orlovsky said the 2 places that we went when he played in the NFL and that had a reputation for this, where your headset, your communication always went out during the game at some point, was Minnesota and New England. And so those hand signals, perhaps, that they're focused on, now think about that in the context of the situation that Dan's describing, right? Think about Deflategate, that principle. And suddenly it's not really a conspiracy anymore. Well, it isn't, because we've seen the evidence and we have even more. So we've got video. And so I have a video set up here where we're going to show you the report from Glazer. It's about 1:06. Then we're going to show you the audio, a piece where it's about a minute. After that initial report, we'll have another minute for you. And then we're going to have some visuals, some tweets, right, that show you from that 2015 article, in relation to what you're hearing the cameraman say as he's filming the Bengals, right? And that whole scenario that Glazer showed us the video of yesterday, you're going to see in 2015 what was reported in relation to what the denials were, what the Patriots told camera people to say when they're denying that they're filming anything that's improper and that they're just doing this for a promotional video for the team. So let's run that tape right now. I'm going to step out 1 second.
Advanced Scout? And this is a piece you're filming on your Advanced Scout?
Yeah.
Yeah. Come on, guys. I don't see the Advanced Scout in this footage.
No, it's not. We were trying to get some field perspective like that.
That's not the field.
Believe that. That's
why you would think you could take that.
I didn't know. I didn't know. But I can delete this right here for you.
Damage is done, my friend.
No, it isn't, because we deleted it.
Once again,
Once it's gone,
22 yards line,
gone.
29 yards on the punt.
I can't
They
get that.
returned 29 yards.
There's no way I can get that footage back. I'm being honest with you. And I don't have a computer to even put it that way. Once this card's, that's it.
Yeah,
The damage is done, my friend.
Scout any of this video they're shooting.
Wow.
And this is a piece you're filming on your Advanced Scout?
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Come on, guys. I don't see the Advanced Scout in this footage.
No, it's not. We were trying to get some field perspective like that.
Okay, now here's what we
That's
have.
not the field.
Believe that.
This is from the 2015 story.
I didn't know. I didn't know. Sorry.
And that's what the Patriots used to do when they were cheating before. They supply
Damage is done, my friend.
the scouts
We deleted it.
with these alibis,
Once it's gone,
members of the organization,
29 yards on the punt.
I can't
which
get
is
that.
precisely the story with the videographer that was caught.
There's no way I can
on
get
this
that
film.
footage back. I'm being honest with you. And I don't have a computer to even put it
And
that
then
way.
you've got Orlovsky
Once this
saying
card's, that's it.
Yeah, I don't see the
This morning.
Advanced Scout in any of this video there.
that was this morning. So there you go. Orlovsky saying that as a guy, as a practical matter, as a quarterback in the NFL playing on the road against the Patriots, and their communication always goes out, and so they got to use hand signals. And then you think about how, as detailed in the ESPN article, I keep going back to it because it's so important, because none of this would exist. We wouldn't be talking about the Patriots in the context of cheating. It would really have gone all away had ESPN not done that story. And I have a feeling that had ESPN known this could happen, they wouldn't have done that story at this point. We saw how ESPN pulled out of the PBS investigation. Remember that front line for CTE? ESPN pulled out of that at the last second. Brazen, egregious. Just saying to the NFL, just bending over for dropping your pants for the NFL. That's why I keep saying, I don't expect Belichick to be suspended. And we talked to a guy who is as respected and esteemed as any NFL writer out there, veteran guy, Greg Bedard. And one of the first things that popped into his mind was suspension or possibly a ban. Yeah, because he's correct. That's sane. That's normal. Unless you've got this state of mass delusion where Jay Glazer breaks this unbelievable story yesterday on Fox NFL Sunday. They go back to the studio set, and everybody there is marginalizing the story by saying they believe Belichick. On what basis do you believe him? Right? And so why would the NFL, knowing what they have there in that situation, and at ESPN, the same ESPN that pulls out of the CTE story to keep up appearances with their relationship with the league that depends so much financially on the NFL, and you think about the NFL ratings and what it means to Fox financially, why would you punish Belichick? You've got a complicit media. And that's why you had this strange, muted response to Jay Glazer's breaking story yesterday. And honest to God, and Cam Smith, our producer, Cam, I don't know if you've seen anything about this, but have you seen any significant media outlet, reporter, insider reporting that Belichick could be suspended or even bringing up the word suspension? I haven't heard or seen anything. I know Jason La Canfora talked about draft picks over at CBS, but no, nobody's talking about suspension. Why would they, right? Yeah, exactly. Why would they? So understand, this is what happens when you have a small number of companies, gigantic corporations that control the distribution of information that you get. It's a small number of companies, and they're all business partners with the NFL. So the information that's going to be disseminated to you is going to be pro NFL, is going to be we're covering up CTE, is going to be why would we punish this coach who has been ascended to mythological status? He's on all of these NFL 100 videos, and suddenly he's disgraced. Why would the NFL do that? And why would the companies that are partnered with them do that? They wouldn't. And why would fans who are so invested, so many people, this is just reality, have invested their identity, right, with the team and the league to a certain, and the legitimacy of this situation, right? Why would so many of those people just detach from that and actually hold Belichick accountable in the end, right? Because it does, strike at the basic integrity of the league. I mean, you could argue it's somewhat similar to after the ridiculous non-call, absurd, weird non-call that we had with the Saints and the Rams during the playoffs last year. How many people brought up the possibility that there could be some funny business going on there with the officials, or who knows, right? As it pertains to gambling, betting, game fixing, point shaving. I haven't heard one person bring it up in the main media ever, right? So that's something that, and I think we showed you a clip on this show from a PBS report that's not so old. It's about 20 years old, I think, where they did a big investigation on gambling in the NFL. But of course, it was PBS. It wasn't, one of the big networks. So really, things haven't changed. They've always been like this to a certain extent. So this is Brooks Melchior, by the way. I'm live in Los Angeles, and this is Sports by Brooks on Fancred. Do it every weekday. A little bit under the weather, have been for the last few days. So please pardon me. I've got the flu, struggling through it a little bit, but rubbing some dirt on it. We're getting through it, and really enjoying talking to you about some of these different things that we're bringing to you that everybody's bringing to you, but that I think we're cutting through that noise and giving you a different perspective. And not that the perspective that I'm giving you is right necessarily. It's certainly in the minority. I'm just trying to explain why, if Belichick isn't suspended, there's a reason for it. Very good reasons for it. And I also want to compliment Jay Glazer on his reporting and his courage to do that under those circumstances. That said, of course, there's a lot of people in the NFL. Most of the teams, I think, don't exactly have an affinity for the Patriots and Belichick. And I'm sure there's some resentment there. So it's not so much that Jay's up against it necessarily with the other teams or the other owners. This is something that maybe the other owners don't mind seeing aired, right? There's a whole nother way to look at this situation. But a media person who is a national reporter who's covering the league, and those are the people who are the highest profile. Those are the people that are least likely to tell it to you straight, right? And to do the bidding of the league. So at the very least, what the league does in this situation with Belichick is a referendum on what the league thinks of the media and, to a certain extent, the fans. Now, if you watch this show, what a lot of what we do, a lot of the opinions that I'm giving you, they really aren't opinions. They're grounded in the 100 years of pro football and the 150 years of college football. One thing I've been looking at lately in college football quite a bit is the media's role in the forward pass. The forward pass was put into the rules in football, not just pro football, all of football. The forward pass was put into the rules in part in 1905 because so many players were being killed, right? So many players were being killed. And so we had to open the game up. And so they put the forward pass into the rules. Now, Walter Camp and the people who invented football, the rules committee at that time, the game had been going on since 1880. It had been going on for 25 years. Well, they knew about the forward pass. They had fought it tooth and nail, but nobody had really had a problem with not having a forward pass, right? For those 25 years, despite the fact that while 19 people were killed playing football in 1905, well, like 26 the year before, and then, 14 the year before. This had been going on forever. So what changed it in 1905? What changed it was the media. The media started reporting on it. The media started asking the president of the United States about it. That's what changed it. And that's why the rules were changed. The president of the United States, Teddy Roosevelt, called in the rules committee to the White House and said, do something, fix this. It had been going on forever, right? And so they put the forward pass. That's how we have the forward pass today, because of the media. Let me look at this for a second. Give me 1 second. My whole point in saying that is that what Cam Smith, our producer, Cam, what Bengals video? Okay. I'm sorry. Never mind. Yeah. I what I want to do is at some point find the Orlovsky comments, because that's something for the vault. Yeah, you think, when he talks about how as an NFL quarterback, their communication always went out. And now when you're watching that video from Jay Glazer yesterday and what we just showed you, now when you hear Dan Orlovsky say that, when you hear him say that their coaches told them, never have your playbook out of your sight, always take it with you, take all your film with you, no matter where you go on the road, when they were going to play the Patriots, that's the only time they did that. Right? So like I said before, I think it's a coin flip whether, I mean, I haven't given you my opinion on if I think Belichick really knew or not. I think it's a coin flip whether or not he knew. But I do think that this is a culture inside the organization. It is the plausible deniability principle that you see in big corporations, where you have an understanding with your employees that they can go do things that in public might not be approved of, but it's a tacit arrangement. And after, it was revealed that the Patriots were cheating so brazenly, so overtly, so systematically, that culture still is ingrained into your organization. So as you go forward, maybe you make some adjustments, and you have the Ernie Adams guy there, the fixer guy, the Harvey Keitel guy, whatever his name is. Cam told me his name last week. The fixer guy from Pulp Fiction. Remember him? That's Ernie Adams for Bill Belichick. And we told you about him. You could Google that guy and there's nothing on him, but he's been with Belichick the whole time. The Winston Wolfe of the New England Patriots, right? You've got that guy there. And I'm not saying he's involved, but I am saying he's involved. So, I get so tired of hearing people, saying they believe Belichick, but then don't add, you know what? It's possible that these people engaged in what they knew was illegal, nefarious conduct as it pertains to the rules. And it's been proven on that video when the guy offered to delete the tape 14 times right away. Why would you do that if you didn't know what you were doing? Remember, by the way, we have the reporting that guy who they just suspended or fired, that was his first time on the road. That's what was reported in one of the New England outlets. I think one of the Boston media outlets reported that was the videographer's first time on the road. So yeah, let's run. Great job, Cam. Let's run the Orlovsky video now. We do have that video of him talking about what it was like with the Patriots. Here we go.
Everything gets radioed in. You know what happens a lot in Foxborough? Your radio goes out. So, I mean, I've been there before when the radio's out all game and you have to signal stuff in. You have to signal personnel. Wow. You have to signal plays. There's hidden signals between coaches. Listen, you can absolutely gather something from that video if you're doing your job well enough.
Yeah. And he also talks about, as I said, I've already said it. I mean, when they would go on the road, it was the one place you would go on the road where the coaches told you, keep an eye on your playbook. I mean, so this is a reckoning, and I think it's not, when I say the media, I mean, the media, we're all part of this thing, fans and stuff. And this isn't the end of the world. I recognize that. But look, the NFL has moved to the center of our culture here. And I do think it's important to look at things in depth and recognize why things are the way they are. And I just gave you the example of the media and football that brought the forward pass into play. And it was solely because the media began to increase its coverage of a problem that had existed for 25 years, deaths in football. And that's what forced the president of the United States to literally act. And by the way, that process created the NCAA. That created the idea there should be this overarching organization. This all happened in 1905 and 1906. And the other big part of this is, folks, when you talk about, because there was a lot of talk in 1905 at the time with the media covering it. That's why I know. I mean, the media covered football more closely than we do today. I mean, that literally. They knew everything that was going on behind the scenes. But listen to this. In 1905, right? This hadn't happened before. The 24 prior years of football, as we know it today, with the rules and everything, hadn't happened. But when the media started to report on these deaths, in a more close manner, right? All of a sudden, state legislatures started to ban football. 4 of them, 4 states banned football. That's how bad it got. And probably a dozen major colleges dropped football. So that was all because of the media, period. The reason we know Notre Dame today is the media. The media created Notre Dame. They created Joe Paterno. That's the way it is. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just telling you what happened. So our perception, and we're part of that transaction. And so that's what's happening here with Belichick, that we're not even talking about a suspension. What? After all these years, the notoriety. By the way, the word notoriety, that's a negative word. It's the most misused word out there. It's not a good thing to have notoriety. That's notorious. You're known for something bad, like O.J. Simpson has notoriety. But Bill Belichick has notoriety. Yet, what do we see in the promos? We see him on the NFL 100 videos, pontificating, holding forth about the greatest players, and that's cool. I enjoy it. I enjoy watching him. He's a fascinating guy. The guy's a genius, no doubt about it. But the fact is, he's a cheater, big time. And there is absolutely no formal acknowledgement of it whatsoever. So I think that we've covered this sufficiently at this point that we're going to move on from the Bengals and Patriots stuff. The one thing I just will say, the last thing is, this is my prediction. There will be no suspension. There won't even be a hint of it for Belichick, right? And just keep in mind, whatever does come out from the NFL is really a reflection of what the NFL thinks of the media, right? We got 3 guys, Jay Glazer, Don Van Atta, and Seth Wickersham. Those are the 3 guys. They're the only reason we know about any of this stuff. If the media was made up of those guys, he'd already be suspended, So coming up, we're going to visit with Connor Orr of MMQB over at Sports Illustrated. He works with our buddy Bert Breer. Do we already have Connor? Wow, he's right on time. He's like early. He's one of those guys. Comes in early. All right, let's bring him up and catch up on what's going on around the National Football League. He's been a busy man on MMQB. I think that's one of your, in the starting rotation of places that you go, and God knows it's competitive, Jesus. But that's one of the places you got to go because of what you guys do. Connor, I really appreciate you coming on. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So let's talk a little bit first about some of the things you've been covering, and that's, a lot of people are paying attention. This is the playoff picture right now, how things are shaking out. And particularly, can you kind of lay out the AFC, how that's playing out? Because the NFC seems, it's kind of cut and dry, a little bit straightforward right now. But what about the AFC?
So really what we're waiting on is sort of Houston went a long way toward settling that division when they beat the Titans this weekend. I think they sort of, right now it's maybe like a 75 to 80% chance. I think I saw 538 have of them reaching the postseason. They'd have to totally blow it down the stretch by either losing to the Buccaneers and the Titans in a row, and then the Titans would also have to win out, which I don't think is very likely. And then, Pittsburgh, it's interesting. By not beating the Bills on Sunday, you at least keep that sliver of hope alive for some of those teams like the Browns and the Titans. So the Titans kind of have a second scenario there to sneak into that wild card. But as of right now, no kind of major seismic changes to it. But, nobody fell out this weekend. But I do think that Pittsburgh is kind of the team to watch here coming down the stretch.
The thing is funny about us, it's important to know where we stand and where teams are going to end up based on what's happening on the field. But just in the last 3 or 4 weeks, all hell's breaking loose. Like the Falcons game is an example. How it can change the complexion of season and your entire perception of a team that maybe isn't justified But I wanted to specifically talk about how that game ended. What was your impression of the way the officials handled the Atlanta situation with San Francisco?
Maybe this is like too. I'm not sure if this is too insidery of a take or whatever it is, but I think it was a victory for replay in general because this entire season has sort of it's explained sort of the ridiculousness of the process, right? We've used replay to essentially bring the human element back into officiating with reviewable pass interference. It's back to what a referee thinks and not the cold facts that they're allowed to use replay to review and decide. And so I thought that, I took out a stopwatch and watched the last two plays of this Falcons 49ers game. And in under 4 minutes, they were able to clearly decide two plays that ended up knocking the number 1 seed in the NFC down to the 5th seed. And giving the Atlanta Falcons a much-needed victory there for Dan Quinn. I mean, that's huge, and that's exactly what you want replay to do. You don't want replay to open up this vault of opinions and different stuff on the matter. You want it to confirm cold facts, and that's what this did on Sunday. And for once, I mean, officials have not heard a good word about themselves in 5 years, but I think this was a minor victory for them, I think, to be able to get two of these calls right.
Do you think we're going to stick to the PI review system that obviously has been maligned this year? Are they going to make some adjustments? What are your thoughts on that going forward?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I talked to one recently retired referee not too long ago who said that what he wants to do is basically a version of what we saw on Sunday. So allow anything to be reviewable that can be determined in a yes or no manner. There's no room for opinion. So make helmet to helmet collisions reviewable, stuff like that, where we can get it right because we can see two guys hitting each other in the head with their helmet. That's stuff that we know. Pass interference, there's too much of a room for different people's opinions. And what is so unfair, I think, to these guys is that they decided after all this process in the offseason to make it, will only overturn the egregious ones. Well, my definition of egregious, your definition of egregious is totally different. And that's why we're seeing such a disparity in these calls. I think there's no way that referees move forward with this or allow the NFL to move forward to this. It's putting them in a bad spot with coaches, with players. I don't think there's any way they allow this to go on to another season.
We're visiting with Connor Orr of MMQB and Sports Illustrated. So you talked about, and it's interesting because you're one of the few guys I've heard put it in that context. Referees are not going to allow it or do not want this to go forward because of the way they're being treated, the way they're being perceived, and it injures their ability to do their job. Is there some sort of formal, gathering of officials where they talk amongst, the entire group of officials where they are pushing back underneath and, the surface that we don't know about? Or could there be something formalized in the future if that sort of thing were to continue?
Well, I think that, they sat in on, there were officials that sat in on the owners' meetings in February when all this stuff started getting kicked up. And I think that they had reservations from the very beginning because of the vagueness of what they were going to decide. But I think that everyone is on board with using technology to make their jobs better. But for some reason, this is the only version that was passed, is that they use technology to make their jobs even harder. Referees have conference calls every week, and I would imagine that when they're talking to Al Riveron, they're saying, hey, I mean, there was that Jets game 2 weeks ago where someone just put his hand on the receiver's back, and that was pass interference that allowed the Jets to get close enough to a game-winning field goal. And then 3 weeks ago, someone was tackled, before they caught the ball and they didn't throw pass interference. And that's what they need to eliminate. They're allowing these guys to get calls wrong 2 or 3 times, and I would imagine that if they're back at owners' meetings and they're sitting in on these meetings like they were last year, there's going to be more of a vocal opposition because I can't imagine they would allow this to happen again without a very strong, without letting everybody know that, hey, you guys are kind of screwing us over here.
Now, I recognize the principle of, we got to get it right. That's the overriding principle no matter what. But NFL officiating, football officiating is defined by subjectivity because of the nature of holding calls and interference calls. I mean, give me a break. And honest to God, I mean, think about it. People are, you see these drive-by, not that they're not legitimate, I guess, in some cases, where there's interference or there's not interference, and then you get 5 million people all over it, and this is unprecedented how bad it is. And I'm thinking to myself the whole time I'm watching this stuff, and this happens particularly in the playoffs, the reviews and it slows the game down so dramatically as to make it almost unwatchable. We got to get it right. Well, it's be careful what you wish for, because I think that's the other side of what's happened this season. And that's the great dilemma, is that you're going to have a lot of mistakes by the officials, but do you really want them calling everything out there? Because don't you think that people would be complaining about that? That'd be the next thing.
Yeah, and I think that was certainly taken into account, and I think that's part of the reason that we have the situation that we do now.
That's exactly what it is.
And that there were a large faction of owners that were like, hey, remember 2 years ago when our ratings dropped, and it wasn't just politics. We were asking people. There was fatigue, and there was that the games are too long now, and I don't feel like sitting through them, and so we're really going to make these longer. And there was a genuine concern there, and that's why I think that I'm surprised that there is not a bigger push for sort of a sky judge system. I understand sort of some of the pitfalls of that you're going to need more well-trained officials to be able to utilize this. But, we watched the Alliance of American Football do it for 9 weeks in a trial run, and I think it works. It speeds everything up. It adds an accountability to the process. We're allowed to, we can see their thought process there. They're seeing the same thing that we're seeing. They have that crystal clear vision. And that way calls can be adjusted on the fly. We don't need this 3-minute interview, process on the sideline where they're looking at stuff. They're talking to Al Riveron. They're talking to all these other people. It's a guy up there that's already looking at a crystal clear picture of what's going on and saying, hey, just fix this real quick, go to the field and call this. And I think that hopefully that's where we're headed, because that can solve so many of their problems. But you're right. There's always going to be the subjectivity calls, the holding, that kind of stuff. That's part of the game, and I think that's what makes it still a little bit interesting. But this will at least take away some of the discussions we've had about the decline of officiating, the bottoming out of officiating, whatever you want to call it.
Visiting with Connor Orr of MMQB and Sports Illustrated. What do you think is going to happen now to the Patriots and perhaps Bill Belichick as it pertains to the Bengals and the video?
I think that they're anticipating a punishment. I think that certainly wouldn't surprise anyone at this point. It's going to be interesting to see what the league does here, because having that video that we saw on Fox that Jay Glazer got a hold of, I think is damning in a lot of ways. To listen to the way the videographer responded to some of those questions, to be able to see the footage that he had, and it sort of diverts a little bit from the initial story, which was, this is just a puff piece on an advanced area scout. Well, there's 8 minutes of substitution patterns and, signs that your coaches are flashing onto the field, whatever it is. So I don't know. It's going to be very interesting. Is this something that Roger Goodell tries to sweep under the rug? Because if you dig into this, then you're opening the league up to something far bigger than he maybe wants to deal with going into their Super Bowl and all that kind of stuff. Or do they bring the hammer down on Bill Belichick and say, hey, this is twice now and it's totally unacceptable?
I mean, you just described what part of that calculation is, but is part of the calculation, will the media and fans hold us accountable, and or do the fans really want to know about this? Is that part of it, you think, in their mind?
That's a great point. I think that some of the fatigue that the league's fans have experienced over the years, I mean, you look at Deflategate or any of this other stuff, Roger Goodell's predecessors were very good at wrong about something, making a definitive decision and just sort of cutting the head off of a problem and pushing everyone's attention over to the right or to the left of the real problem. And he has been unable to do that. Maybe it's because the league is covered differently, because there's sort of this now sort of moral lightning rod of society because it's gotten so popular. But whatever it is, I don't think that he has that ability to sort of just tiptoe around this. I mean, and if they're going to go head on and dive into cheating in the NFL, I mean, that's going to be this could be the story of our lifetimes. If this could be gigantic.
It's fascinating because he's got a group of owners that want him to act. That's the story that we're not really registering, I think, right now, because we're not really hearing that story. But perhaps that's how Jay Glazer got the tape. Maybe it wasn't the Bengals. Maybe it was somebody else. I don't know. What's interesting about I'm very interested in what you said about him, like a Pete Rozelle making a strong decision and sticking with it. And it makes me think of the JFK, I believe it was JFK's assassination, if you remember. And the NFL made the decision. The AFL decided at the time not to play the games the next Sunday, but the NFL played the games. And so he was flambéed in the media for a few weeks, but then eventually he was named Sports Illustrated's Man of the Year, like at the end of the year, right? So there's something to be said. I mean, you've got that kind of power even back then, perhaps, but that's what took place in the past, and that obviously the history of it is going to inform, instruct us now. But so we're visiting with Connor Orr of MMQB and Sports Illustrated, and so now when you look at the Cowboys situation, we're hearing everybody say Jason Garrett's gone. All right. This is different this year. It's not like it has been in the past. So why is it different? Why should we expect Jason Garrett to be fired? Is it because they have more talent, a higher expectation this year? Jerry Jones is getting older. I mean, or now has he changed that status based on the Rams game?
He said that things don't change week to week, but I imagine there was a large sense of relief in the owner's box after that Rams game, just because he doesn't want to fire Jason Garrett. I think if he had wanted to fire Jason Garrett, he would have done it 2 or 3 years ago. I think that they have a relationship. I think Jerry likes the idea that he sort of raised him from position coach and, even backup quarterback to head coach. It was, something that he can say, hey, I recognized this in him a long time ago. I saw this in him. And, that there's a relationship there. There's that community down in Dallas. If you've ever been in Frisco, I think that Jason Garrett can operate all that, navigate that super well. He fits in really well down there. So I think that everything in his heart is saying, let's give him every opportunity to succeed. Let's hope that they win a few games. And if not, then I'll have to really do something drastic. Because I do think, as grim as it is to talk about, I mean, there is a factor of, hey, I want to win another Super Bowl. I want to see this happen. And am I wasting my time? Because it's going to take another 5 or 10 years to build a roster as good as the one I have now, especially when you talk about all the resources and the time and the effort it put just to get this offensive line together, something like that.
Boy, something fascinating played out yesterday, and it wasn't even news. And to me, I'm 52 years old. And this shows you how times have changed. You may not remember, but I'm from Kansas City originally, Chiefs guy, but a Royals guy. And I remember the first year, I'm actually going to make an NFL point here, but the first year the Royals got to the ALCS and they lost the game on a 10th inning home run by a guy named Chris Chambliss, right? He hits the home run in Yankee Stadium, and I don't remember what, this is like 1976, all right? And so the Yankees, when they're going to go to the World Series, the guy who hits the home runs, rounding the bases at Yankee Stadium, and he's getting assaulted by his own fans. Have you ever seen that video?
Yes. Yeah,
it's like Escape from New York, the movie, right? It's crazy. And so, of all places, you've got the Oakland Coliseum, you've got the Raiders, that supposed reputation, and you've got the situation. It's beyond absurd at this point, what's going on and how the Raiders organization, and I mean, the history of it is stunning. You could imagine if somebody at some point is going to write a dissertation about this. Just all of the things between Los Angeles, year after year, Mount Davis, you name it. And so for it to go out that way, I think is an indicator of how things have changed to a certain extent. But what are your thoughts about the fact that there really wasn't? I mean, there was a little bit, but in the way that it happened, in the way that they're now leaving, what are your thoughts about that process?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're going to have a really hard time filling a stadium in Las Vegas. I think that, as passionate as these fans are, and I guess if you want to call it that, whatever we saw yesterday, they were throwing nachos and beer on the field, and there were people jumping onto the things and getting wrangled by security guards. I don't know if those people are driving 7 hours to Las Vegas to watch a football game. And, I don't think that John Gruden necessarily possesses the kind of star power that Mark Davis thinks he does in the way that, a coach is going to be able to fill a football stadium. I mean, think about the 4 or 5 coaches in history that might have been able to do that just based on their own bravado or their own energy or how smart they are and the product they put on the field. I'm very interested to see what happens because, we're heading into this area where the Chargers in a very empty 120,000 seat stadium next year, and the optics of that are going to be really bad. And then you kind of juxtapose that with what's going on in Oakland, and all of a sudden, I don't know. I think the NFL has a serious problem on their hands. Think about, we were having a discussion about this at work the other day, sort of the big problems that nobody's really thinking about coming down the pike. And, just think about the optics of these empty stadiums and look at what teams have done to avoid that in the past. And they're going to be staring that right in their face 8 times a year in 2 cities and, on the West Coast. And that's not going to be good.
Is there a problem, you think, in the future with financial solvency, with Davis running that, to owning that team?
It's interesting. Certainly, those are rumors that have, people have heard. I don't know. I think that, we've been hearing conversations about that since the Khalil Mack deal. It's like, did they actually have the money to keep him? Is that part of the reason that they let him go? All that kind of stuff. But I think in 10 years, we might be looking back at this and saying, he was one of the last of these people, these founding families that are slowly getting kicked out of the league by the billionaire class. And maybe that's true. Maybe the price for ownership and the everything that it requires is rising. And I don't know. That's going to be. I'm just fascinated in every aspect of what's going to happen with that moving forward.
Yeah, this is an amazing year. This has just been a kick-ass year to be an NFL fan because of all the talent we have at quarterback and all of the intrigue that we have off the field. God knows we're talking about it right now. I can't thank you enough for jumping on short notice. Thanks so much, Connor, for doing this. And by the way, you're a freaking awesome follow on Twitter. I've been following you forever, just to let you know.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that.
Just keep doing what you're doing. It's phenomenal, and your coverage is phenomenal, and give Bird our best, and you guys are the best over there. Really, really enjoy what you do with the NFL.
Really appreciate it. Thanks for saying that.
Thank you, Connor. That's Connor Orr of Sports Illustrated, MMQB. And so what we wanted to do, I'm actually going back and forth with some people that may be guests. That's why I'm looking over here. But what we want to do to kind of wind things down a little bit, we didn't run one of our NFL things that we had. Let me check that real fast over here, which would be the, just because I wanted to run this. You saw what happened yesterday. Can you get the don't play it yet, Cam Smith, our producer. So we had a situation with the Cowboys yesterday with the coin toss. You may or may not have seen, that was much ado, that ended up where New York jumped in because Walt Anderson, the referee of the Cowboys game yesterday with the Rams, screwed up the coin toss. Dak Prescott didn't screw it up. DeMarcus Lawrence didn't screw it up for the Cowboys. The referee did. And so there was some confusion that perhaps the Cowboys were going to be kicking off both halves, whereas Dak originally said for the coin toss, defer the second half. Apparently Anderson, the referee, didn't hear him and was going to award the ball to the Rams in the second half. That didn't happen because, again, the league came in, Al Riveron came in and made sure that didn't happen, which is great. That's the way it should be. But it wasn't always that way in the NFL. And I wanted to give you, and this is actually, that's not necessarily a great comparison, but I wanted to show you the video of that yesterday. And so you can hear, if you haven't, hear Dak Prescott clearly say, defer. Guys, defer. And then we have an example of when things really do actually go wrong. And there wasn't anything to fix. So stay tuned to this clip because we got a cool clip coming after it of something that had happened in the past.
That proves that he did say deferred.
Like the NFL 4 years earlier, the AFL was producing
this is 1961
drama on live television.
Overtime.
And thanks to ABC's emphasis on sound, the lead roles would have speaking parts.
So this is the AFL Championship game overtime. And the coin toss.
Out here in the playing field, a very very shortly we're going to have the toss of the coin as the overtime period will come about.
Stram decided having 40-mile-an-hour winds at Dallas's back was more important than getting the ball first. So he told Abner Haynes to choose the wind if Dallas won the toss.
While the coin's in there, and call it loudly now. Yeah. Call it. Heads. Heads! Now Dallas won. You have your choice, of course, receiving or kicking. We will kick to the clock. You're going to kick? Yeah. To the clock. Right.
It's overtime.
Haynes misspoke. He thought he was taking the wind, but the words, "we'll kick," meant Dallas had made its choice and would kick off.
Whoops.
Houston
Oops.
then chose which end zone to defend. The Oilers would begin overtime with the wind and the ball. It was a dramatic twist a nation of viewers got to see and hear.
Well, Kurt, I asked one of the Dallas players what it was all about, and he simply said Abner Haynes had made a mistake.
Stram was, on the sideline talking
Look
to
who's here!
Haynes in a very consoling way. Obviously, he knew he'd made a huge mistake. It was a great insight into a player-coach relationship in such a critical game, in such a critical situation.
It is right. So there's yesterday. So yesterday was a screw up on the officials' part. That is the most famous coin toss in football history. 1961. That was part of a documentary that they did on the AFL. But the Dallas Texans end up becoming the Kansas City Chiefs. Hank Stram, the coach, ends up coaching the Chiefs to their only Super Bowl in 1970. So the Texans moved to Kansas City, and Lamar Hunt owned that team in Dallas. And so just wanted to look at that. And the main reason, though, I wanted to show that clip was there was harpsichord music on there. It's the old NFL films, AFL stuff, the great soundtracks. They actually got the harpsichord on there, which I love. I loved all that old music. Unbelievable. That's what happens when you're an old guy. You remember that stuff. You enjoy it. So I wanted to do one more thing here that was really, really cool. And we're going to give you a little history with this too. So we have yesterday, what is that I can remember, probably the most notable Heisman Trophy speech by the winner that I can remember literally in my lifetime, where people were like buzzing about it the next day. So we're not going to play the whole speech from Joe Burrow, but I wanted to play you a little bit of it. And then I wanted to play you, when you think about, remember the Lou Gehrig, luckiest man of the world speech kind of thing. Before the Joe Burrow speech, I think the most famous Heisman speech was from Niall Kinnick. Niall Kinnick was a running back for Iowa in 1939. And Kinnick Stadium in Iowa is named after him. And he was a great player, would have been a great pro player, but he ends up, it's 1939. And so as he's getting this award for the Heisman Trophy, I mean, he's getting it at the end of the year. This is a couple of months into the Nazis invading Poland. So now, we've got this war specter in the United States. So Niall Kinnick is giving his speech in the midst of the Germans starting World War II, right? And so what we're going to do is we're going to play the Burrow speech first, just a little snippet of it to give you an idea. And then we're going to play a little snippet of that actual Niall Kinnick speech in 1939, two notable Heisman Trophy speeches. So let's start with the Joe Burrow speech, if you've got that video.
It is my pleasure to announce the 2019 winner and 85th recipient of the Heisman Memorial Trophy is...
I edited this down a little bit.
Joe Burrow, Louisiana State University. Congratulations. LSU.
Coming from Southeast Ohio, it's a very, very impoverished area, and the poverty rate is almost 2 times the national average, and there's so many people there that don't have a lot. And I'm up here for all those kids in Athens and in Athens County that go home to not a lot of food on the table, hungry after school. And you guys can be up here too. I'd like to thank Louisiana, the entire state. Like I said earlier, just a kid from Ohio coming down chasing a dream. And the entire state has welcomed me and my family with open arms and invited us in to be native Louisianans. I've learned to love crawfish and gumbo, and during crawfish season, Coach O makes sure we have pounds and pounds and pounds of crawfish during that year. Coach O. You have no idea what you mean to my family. I didn't play for 3 years. You took a chance on me, not knowing if I could play or not. And I'm forever forever grateful for you. Can you imagine a guy like Coach O giving me the keys to his football program? He just means so much to me and my family. And to LSU, I sure hope they give him a lifetime contract. He deserves it. And then Coach Joe, Coach Steve, Coach Munoz, all here. You guys have helped me through so much, understanding the game, putting so much on my plate that I couldn't ask for a better group of coaches. Help me be successful. So thank you to everyone here. There's so many people that I should thank, and unfortunately I just don't have the time. But those people know what they mean to me and my family, and so when I lift this trophy again, it's for LSU, Ohio State, Southeast Ohio, and all of Louisiana. Thank you.
Boy, that was perfect, wasn't it? That was good. All right, so that's Joe Burrow. So I don't want to make too big a deal because this is a short little clip. But so this is the tail end of, remember, Niall Kinnick Stadium at Iowa, very famous football player at Iowa. And so this is 1939, and he's giving this speech like 2 or 3 months after Germany has invaded Poland and World War II has started. So listen to this closely. This is Niall Kinnick in New York giving his speech for the Heisman.
The Heisman Memorial, the culmination of all the glory that had come to his teammates, his coach and Niall Kinnick, was reached in December of 1939 when his coach accompanied him to New York. Here he was to receive the Heisman Memorial Trophy Award as the outstanding college football player in the United States for 1939, chosen by the sports writers and sports broadcasters of America.
Finally, if you will permit me, I'd like to make a comment which in my mind is indicative perhaps of the greater significance of football and sports emphasis in general in this country, and that is, I thank God I was warring on the gridirons of the Midwest and not on the battlefields of Europe.
So he's referencing World War II, which had just started. He was happy he was warring. I think he said the word warring on the fields, football fields here, and not over in France at the moment where it was going on, where it was happening, or Poland or wherever. What did he say? I don't remember. But Niall Kinnick is like a folk hero in the state of Iowa. If you've ever been there, everything's Kinnick. What's interesting about that situation is Kinnick Stadium, right? The Iowa Stadium's named after him. And so when they named the stadium originally, which is somewhat recently, it's like in the last 40 years, I think it is, They were going to call it Kinnick Slater Stadium after Niall Kinnick and Duke Slater, who was this great lineman who played in the NFL for years and years and was a giant, literally, figuratively, when it came to recruiting and stuff for Iowa for the football team. That's the original plan. Why would they include Duke Slater, though? Was he really that great a player? Yes, he was. And he was black. And he was the first black player at Iowa. And he successfully recruited star black players for years for Iowa, in addition to himself playing in the NFL. And what's interesting about Duke Slater is he goes to the NFL, right, in the 1920s. Well, in 1933, the NFL resegregates and removes all the black players. But at the time, Duke Slater was the last black player left in the league. And it wouldn't be until 1946, like 12 years later, before the NFL allows black players back into the league. So you can imagine Duke Slater is the only black player in the NFL. So eventually, a sports writer in Iowa City launches a campaign to exclude Duke Slater's name from the stadium. And so that's why it's Kinnick Stadium today. That's what happened. So a little backstory, a little tragedy for you. There was a lot of that at that time. And so, but just wanted to give you an extra dimension to what was an amazing speech by Joe Burrow in just a transcendent year. It's really indescribable what's happened from his performances and Orgeron and the manifestation, I think, of what I personally thought was possible with him at some point, especially when he did the interim thing at USC. It's unbelievable that USC blew that situation and that opportunity. But, oh, my God, it's so poetic, the poetic justice that he ends up at LSU. And the other thing is Joe Burrow, I mean, he's from Southeast Ohio, you know, Cincinnati's right there. What are the odds? I just pray to God Mike Brown doesn't screw that up. Who knows, man? It's the Bengals. Who knows? But honest to God, can you not see a number 9 Joe Burrow in a Bengals jersey? I can picture it in my mind's eye. Nothing has ever been that perfect in the history of the NFL draft than Joe Burrow going to the Cincinnati Bengals. Man, I think we almost, Cam Smith, our producer, Cam, I think we almost covered pretty much everything that we had planned. Usually we get to nothing. But I think this time around, we've gotten to most of our stories. It's been a very enjoyable day. I was a little under the weather today. Have been for the last few days, but we're doing all right. We're going to be fine. It's that coming. By the way, today here in Los Angeles is the coldest day of the year. It's like in the 40s. I mean, this is the first day in LA this year it's been this cold. So put the heat on, put the sweater on, got too hot, had to take it off, people banging on the door, whatever. But so that's what we're dealing with. 40 degrees. Oh my God. People hearing this, rolling their eyes. I can only imagine what you guys are thinking. Sorry about that. But coming up later in the week, we're going to have Newey Scruggs on from Dallas, longtime Dallas media guy, does television sports, local sports, national guy. Newey Scruggs, we're going to talk to him about the Cowboys. He's tremendous, outstanding. We're going to have some great Cowboys coverage, as always. Patriots coverage with Phil Perry coming up from NBC Sports Boston. And more surprises, I'm sure, from that neck of the woods. Jamel Hill's is going to be with us later on in the week. And tomorrow we're going to have Mike McCarthy on from Front Office Sports. A lot of people coming up, but that's going to do it for today. For now, we'll be back tomorrow, same time, noon Eastern time. I want to thank, again, our great producer, Cam Smith, thinking fast on his feet with the Orlovsky clip today. That was outstanding. The improvisation, that's what you got to have in these shows. And handling the guests as always. And my name is Brooks Melchior. I'm in Los Angeles saying so long. This has been Sports by Brooks on Fancred.